Three, two, one. You're listening to Two Babies in a Business, a podcast about business, marketing, growth strategy, staff, clients, babies, and marriage. I'm Christina. This is Peter. We're founders and leaders of CIPR Communications, and we are talking value of tourism. And actually, Peter, this episode I called Your Support for Tourism Strategy, because we haven't mentioned this so far, and I don't even know if you know this.
I'm on the edge of my seat right now.
But some of our clients, depending on the region you're in or the program that you've developed, actually call it a support for tourism as opposed to a value of tourism. So if you've been listening to this and go, oh, I think I kind of know something. If many places, I think about our friends at Travel Manitoba, they have branded it support for tourism as opposed to value of tourism. I mean, they mean the same things. It's the same conversation, but I thought, we're a couple episodes in now, so I don't want anyone to feel left out.
There you go. Nice. So support for tourism strategy. So today we're talking about the strategy part of things.
Yeah, so we've gone through, we've talked to a few interesting folks too. We just finished talking to Bev from Tourism Kamloops was the last episode. And, we've gone through this, like, is it political? What are your goals? Are you being realistic? So all those things. And then I think there's this important strategic piece that's next. So really we've been building your strategy all along, but
you've been building the components of your strategy, but now it's time to put the whole thing together. Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. And really the starting point for this is understanding maybe or knowing whether this is going to be an engagement campaign or an education campaign. Is that a fair place to start?
Yeah. And actually, what's interesting about, I think, how we usually structure it at CIPR is most of the time you're always starting with education. So, you and I come from government, and I feel like there's a joke that goes around internally or amongst political parties about, you government's great at solving problems that people didn't know existed.
Right.
So, this whole notion of, like, you need to gain support for tourism, or you need to understand the value of tourism. Really, most places, especially if you've never done anything on the value of tourism side before, need to be educated about tourism first.
Right.
And so I think there's this important campaign around educating people around tourism. And sometimes that's, hey, tourism's important. We'll, like, think about Bev's conversation with us. She came to town and nobody, like, tourism was never at the table. People didn't know tourism was important.
Right.
And so she really had to educate that tourism is this really big contributor to our economy.
Even put tourism on the minds of people and to help them actually think of their town as a place where tourism happens, and the tourism actually has a big impact and that kind of thing. So you're not even really, so you're really just sort of creating awareness and building awareness for the industry itself and its value and what it's doing, right?
Yeah, and I think there's that component. And then I think we talked to Andrea from Castlegar, and her big thing too around educating hoteliers that just because your hotel is full because of an energy project doesn't mean that's not tourism. Like, that there is something called a business tourist. And so there's all these, like, I think the very first question you need to ask yourself is, what doesn't my community understand about tourism? What don't they know or potentially buy into? I think your polling helps you tell that. Like, if big disconnects.
Yeah, that's why you probably want to do, as I think one of our episodes was called, Don't Assume. That's why we suggest doing all that work up front, so that you can build this strategy not based on here's what I think, but here's what we've heard, here's what we understand. And, I don't want to talk about any DMO specifically, but we've certainly seen things in some of the polls we've done where people's, they may even value tourism and think it's an important industry, but then, not understand components of it or not understand, right? Like we've noticed in the polling, and it's very different across every poll we've done, sort of what people's perceptions were, right? And so, yeah, I mean, and really that becomes your strategy, is wherever you're weak is your starting point in terms of education, right? And this is really where you should be focusing your efforts, and starts to develop your key messages, and and you go from there, right?
Yeah, and I think to your point, like every community is different. I know there was one, again, not to name any DMOs, but I know there was one poll we did a few years back where there was just this love of tourism and the industry is important and we get it, but there's a big disconnect around like the city versus the DMO versus
Right.
the economic development, like the players.
Right. Yeah.
So that education campaign largely became about educating about what your DMO does.
Right. And is that educating the public about what your DMO does, or is that educating even the players within, the sort of active players in terms of the role of the DMO, or is it both?
Yeah, I think that's like the important conversation in this stage of your strategy is who's your target audience. And I think
Right.
a lot of the time and it depends on your goals, right? Like, so those goals set out, if it is about that brand awareness side or organizational awareness, then I think you go broad.
Yeah.
I think that sometimes in these campaigns, so one kind of big push that we typically do in an education side of a campaign is around telling your target audience that you are in tourism. And I always use the example of CIPR. So like, we are obviously not in tourism. We don't own a hotel and we don't, we're not a water slides in the backyard,
Right.
but indirectly, when the tourism industry is thriving, we work in the tourism space for our clients, and that is a direct benefit to us. So in the education campaign, typically, especially if it's the first time you've ever talked about support for tourism in your community, you would start by this, I am tourism. Like, I, Christina Pilarski, am actually a face of tourism. Like, my business can do well if the tourism industry in our nation is doing well. The baker down the street does even better. The blueberry farmer, the one example we used in the campaign was like the dry cleaner, like the industrial commercial, like linens, right? And bed sheets, like that business thrives if hotels are full and busy. So like all these industries, and we try to, from a strategic perspective, suss out people that, okay, Christina, she thrives because of this, and let's tell a story about it and let's move forward. So again, I think that you have a big general audience, but if you can really think, and we're going to talk about tactics in the next episode, are there tactics that reach a general audience, but then you're empowering them to tell others? So in this particular I Am Tourism campaign, we had in one, I guess, jurisdiction, I'm trying to be more generic, a postcard campaign. So if you were from the tourism industry, whether directly or indirectly, you could sign the postcard, tell them what you did for a living, and then the address was the mayor's office. So the mayor got hundreds of postcards, and it wasn't just like, I'm Bob and I work at the hotel. It was like, I'm Christina, I'm a marketing consultant. I'm Peter, I do this for a living. And so government was a really important target audience, but we use this general population as a first step to then get to that step, if that makes sense. So complicated, but I feel like, again, your strategy and your goals dictate your target audience. And so from that education component, most likely you're going to educate all those different target audiences in a different way.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's an important message, is to make sure that you're differentiating your message based on your target audience, and you're not sort of telling everybody sort of the same thing, but you're sort of making it relevant to each particular group based on where they fit into in the grander scheme of things.
It's true. And then I would say the only time we ever skip education as a step is if it's if it's been done.
Right.
Right. So if we talked about this kind of notion, this isn't just a campaign, it's something you do every year now, or it's something built into the DNA of your destination marketing organization. Obviously, that education looks different year after year if you've been doing it aggressively or at least consistently. I mean, there's always going to be a new issue that you probably have to educate people around.
Yeah.
Probably have to keep sharing, visitor economy numbers. You probably have to keep sharing the latest information and stats about employment in the tourism space. Or with COVID, I feel like there's a whole other layer of safety and restrictions and that piece that you're educating around.
Yeah.
But that campaign almost shrinks. I don't think it ever disappears completely, but as you kind of build it into what you do every year, I think the education component becomes smaller.
Right. And then it becomes more of an engagement campaign.
Yeah. Or if like there's a new, like if it's an election year and you have a new municipal government, obviously that education campaign probably takes the forefront again, or those pieces.
Nice. Cool. Well, that's the strategy.
Well, that's the education piece of the strategy.
I guess,
the next piece is engagement. And so engagement, do you want to talk about it? I mean,
go ahead. No, this is your area. This is you're the master of this.
Talking. So engagement is that empowerment play. So in some campaigns we call this the activation. Sometimes we call it the engagement. Sometimes empowerment. But this is okay, if you just ran a post, I'll use the postcards as an example still. If you just ran I am tourism as your education, maybe your next round of postcards that go into that office is I value tourism, or this particular tourism goal is important to me, or right, like you're actually pushing towards your goals now.
Right.
So in that spirit of, you can't come out hot and just be like, I want all the money right away, or I need everyone to know what I'm doing right away. The engagement piece becomes now, how are you using those target audiences that you've now educated to further your goals?
Makes sense.
And so that's that piece. And I feel like that's a side you need to keep doing and refreshing and finding new ways to talk to your target audience. That becomes your real, I guess, more marketing play and
more creative and more, I don't know, I don't want to say fun, because I think both sides have some fun, but where you can have a little more fun and be a little more maybe outside of the box creative.
It's true. Okay. Yeah. So next episode, we'll talk about all of these tactics.
All of the tactics. Nice.
So you should have your strategy by now. So you have your goals, you have your focuses, your target audiences, you're thinking about the research you need. You've now thought about, okay, what do I need to educate people about? How long do I need to educate them for? Is this a month campaign? Is it a quarter? Is it a whole year? Right. And again, I think this goes back to the be realistic. So you're not going to educate people overnight. Take your time. A lot of DMOs move towards kind of tourism week every year.
Yeah, that's sort of a big time where a lot of this kind of gets unveiled, for lack of better terms, or gets communicated, especially.
Yeah, and like a nice week to educate, right? Like a nice excuse to throw some numbers out and have that conversation. And then you can move into this empowerment side.
Right.
That's nice. All I got. I chatted a lot.
You chatted a lot, but this is your area and your department. So I don't want to pretend that I actually know what what it is you do that's so brilliant, because I only have a high level knowledge of that.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate it.
You do great work. So there you go.
Okay, well, follow along. We're talking tactics next, and you can find us iTunes, Spreaker, Spotify, Two Babies in a Business, and CIPR Comms on all the social media.
See ya.
3, 2, 1.